Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to #GotMoney. I've got two of my favourite guests on Got Money with us this afternoon. I've got Hayley Mitchell and I've got Kate Bakos. As you know, Hayley Mitchell is a superstar when it comes to legislation around your tenancy management rights. And Kate Bakos is, of course, Melbourne's favourite property advocate. Welcome, ladies. Welcome to #GotMoney.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, gosh, I kind of wanted to start talking about lending a little bit with Kate, and just get an understanding from you how it's looking your end. I kind of feel like the banks have shrunk a little bit around their like for transactions, particularly within the Melbourne property space. How are you finding it out there?
Yeah, I'm loving that you're addressing this because it hasn't come up in the media yet. And I certainly feel that credit availability and bank selectiveness has changed quite a bit. We had really tough constraints on credit leading into the federal election, and that was, for a few reasons, but namely we had the Banking Royal Commission hanging over us, and so lenders were being very, very cautious and picky about who they took on and obviously what their loan books looked like. But now they're all looking after their own risk, which is what you'd expect. But we've found that the strict adherence to policy and their reluctance to take on risky applicants is one factor, but also the offshore processing and obviously the discord that we've experienced with coronavirus impacting other countries as well has really slowed things down. So we've ground to a halt and we've got lenders that are picking and choosing who they want. And I've never seen assessment queues like it. We're getting lenders asking their applicants to put subject to finance for 4 weeks on a contract. And we all know how ridiculous that would feel for a vendor and an agent.
Yeah, it's I think what's interesting about it too is we have files out there where the applicants are sound, and one of them, I'll give you an examples in construction on a union site, is now on JobKeepers, and we've been asked to resubmit all the documentation, and it just feels onerous. It feels like, and I just had a conversation with a lender in Sydney and I said, what's happening with our Victorian market around the lending appetite? And he said, they are starting to view Victoria as high risk. And I think he called Daniel Andrews Chairman Daniel, which I'm not leaning into that. I think Daniel Andrews is doing the best that he can, but I think it's impacting greatly on the lending environment looking at us with any favour. And I think that that's detrimental, particularly to our clients who are desperately trying to get into the market. Hayley, over to you. How's the world of tenancy management?
Depends where you're located.
Yeah.
If you're located in regional areas, pretty good still. I think Geelong, our vacancy rates actually dropped down to about 2%. Which is like pre-COVID times, and we're getting really good quality applications. We processed 30 applications last week. So for us, for a small business, that's amazing. And we've got really good tenants out there looking. Melbourne, totally different market. It really is. They're getting hit hard, particularly in a city around Docklands. They're seeing massive reductions in rent, a lot of tenants on JobKeeper, a lot of tenants on rent relief as well. So yeah, the Melbourne market is very, very different to regional at the moment.
Kate and I have been notoriously putting our clients into regional Victoria for a number of years, so we're quite happy with ourselves, aren't we, Kate? We're like,
keep behind Geelong.
On that note, Hayley, I'm very close to the activity of your workplace because we have a lot of clients that you look after once we've found them an investment property. And I fell off my chair when I got the notification through this morning that we haven't even settled yet, and you've found a tenant for a property in Grovedale. And I think to manage that, and also with the technology that you're using in COVID, it's really hats off to you guys, but it's definitely a sign of your work and your systems, but also the strength of the regional market as well. And the same can be said, I've got a wonderful property manager in Ballarat, and we typically have that kind of activity there as well, where we get permission to advertise prior to settlement, and we get the phone call before settlement.
Isn't that good? Hayley had a couple of my clients, and one of them called me, funnily enough. I'm going to give you a bit of a rap too, Hayley. And she just said, look, the experience with Hayley's team was just entirely different from the other agent. She was there, she met the client at the property, took her through, gave her the how to get her depreciation schedule, didn't overquote on the amount of money the client could achieve in her rental. So, a really good rental manager makes all the difference in our space, doesn't it, Kate?
Yeah, huge. I see your online video efforts. You guys have the setup for the 360 camera, and you're in and out. It looks great. Yeah, I think in this climate, we all have to be thinking on our feet, doing things differently, but you've really been doing it well.
How are you doing it, Hayley? You're doing a camera through the property?
Yeah, so regionals, again, different. We can go to the property freely. We obviously can't do open for inspections, but we can do private appointments. See, in Melbourne...
Look at me and Elizabeth getting excited about going to a house.
A
random house, that'd be great.
In Melbourne, they can't even go and do the 360 tours of the property. So if they didn't have them set up prior to COVID or this 6-week lockdown, then they can't do anything. The properties are just sitting vacant. So it's really tough for those people in Melbourne, but we have all of our properties with those tours, and it just means that we can actually lease properties without the tenants physically viewing them. And funnily enough, we're getting heaps of applications at the moment from people living in Melbourne, because I think people are realising that, number one, their workplaces have changed. They don't have to now travel into the city and work 9 till 5 and come home. So technically, a lot of workplaces are going to keep with that remote working environment, which means that technically they can live anywhere. So instead of paying $600 a week for a flat in Docklands, they can come out to Geelong or Ballarat or Bendigo and get a beautiful house in a really good location for that sort of money, or cheaper. So they're actually getting a better lifestyle. They don't have to travel to work because they're working remotely. So we're seeing really good applicants from Melbourne moving out to these areas, which is also driving up our rental prices as well.
I might be one of them if this carries on, actually.
Interesting. And you know what? I get a lot of people saying, what do you think about me moving to Macedon? Or what do you think about the idea of heading to Woodend or wherever it might be? And if they've never experienced living outside of the city, and if they're not super familiar with these ideas in their head, I say to them, why don't you try before you buy? So go and rent for a year and see how you feel.
That's a good idea. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, I wonder if some of your prospective or your tenants, Hayley, are having a practice run at, Escape to the Country.
Absolutely. And a lot of my friends are doing it at the moment too. They're like, right, we're moving out your way. I'm like, great, come join us. We're having a great time.
Hayley, talk to me about evictions. I've heard the other day that a colleague of mine at Joy is being evicted from a property. I thought that you weren't allowed to do that. I thought there were no evictions in COVID.
It depends on the reason. So we can still evict tenants through COVID, but it's very much, it has to go through Consumer Affairs first before it even gets to VCAT. And then they have to refer us to VCAT, and then it's up to VCAT whether we can get the termination or not. And they've removed some of our reasons for evicting as well. So we've got less opportunities. So, for example, if a tenant is affected financially by COVID, then no, we cannot evict them. But if a tenant just goes, yabba dabba do, I'm not going to pay my rent, which is your favourite, Elizabeth.
I love the yabba dabba doos.
Then we can evict them because they're not affected by COVID. They're just deciding to play on the legislation.
So I happen to know that none of those things, like he hasn't done anything that would be considered irresponsible inside his tenancy. I just think he's got a pretty heavy-handed tenancy manager. So thank you for...
I I wonder if there's a possibility that the owner of the property is in hardship and they desperately need to move back.
Or could that be, so that's allowed?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That feels reasonable.
Yeah. So it really, there's so many different situations that we're coming across at the moment that we've never had to deal with, or I've never had to deal with in my 21-year career. And we've just I think everyone's just taking each situation as it stands and then working through one by one, because there's kind of usually a one size fits all, but there's not at the moment, because there's just too many different circumstances affecting everyone.
So true.
Kate, there's a conversation around a property cliff here in Victoria, and it's been speculated obviously by people that aren't in the property industry. What are your thoughts about that statement?
We've had property cliffs and bubbles and downturns and collapses on the agenda for as long as I've been alive, and as long as people before me have been alive. There'll always be a speculator who, you know, will be saying this, and it's usually because they're not in the market. Maybe they'll feel better seeing others not doing so well, or they do focus on the negatives. And we've got to take a balanced view here. We went through an enormous change and had an enormous shock, emotionally and economically, when this thing hit. I remember the last public auction that I was at was the day after the pandemic. So it was on the 14th of March, and everyone was a little bit nervous, and the agents were doing an elbow bump thing, and we weren't wearing face masks, but we're all thinking, gosh, it's now called a pandemic. I wonder how bad this will get. And even my client said to me that morning, we still want the house, but we're going to change down our budget a little bit. And we still managed to get it. And at that stage, we started seeing news feed out of Spain and Italy, and it was horrendous. You know, they were having deaths, and it was out of control, and the hospitals were overwhelmed. And we were all very fearful, justifiably, because we didn't know how it would affect Australia. And at that time, I had just about all of my clients go on hold. Everyone wanted to go on pause. And for the few that didn't, in that 2.5, 3 week period, we were getting 10% off the appraised amount. So I saw prices come off 10% very quickly. It felt like overnight. And then the prices strengthened and things got back on track when we flattened our curve, and it became evident that we weren't at that stage going down the same path as Italy and Spain. And I would argue that prices were pretty much back to what they were. And then stocks shortage set in. And so that really has underpinned our values sitting reasonably firm. And I would argue that that shock then was greater than any shocks that are coming soon, because we really didn't know what was happening. And I'm in the same space as you, Elizabeth. We're dealing with buyers. And yes, there are a lot of households and a lot of businesses and people that have been impacted negatively, but there are a lot that haven't. And there are a lot of people with money, with pre-approval, who are ready to go. And the real question is, how many buyers will we have, and how many vendors will we have? Because when we look at that supply and demand, that's what determines price falls or prices strengthening. And we're not suddenly going to have no people who want to buy a house. It doesn't happen like that. So I'm not subscribing to the cliff. And there were so many people that wanted to wait it out until September and then swoop in like seagulls once we all fell off the cliff. But now that it's been pushed out to March, a lot of people are saying, yeah, you know what, March is ages away, let's just buy something now. And that is the consensus for a lot of buyers out there.
It's interesting, isn't it? We all hear the same gossip. I heard it was pushed to March too. Oh, the cliff's not now, it's March. I was speaking to Tim Boyle the other week, as you know, and he's of the same mind. He talks about supply and demand. So you're noticing, well, I guess it's obvious in this particular climate right now that people aren't selling their properties due to this lockdown. Do you think there'll be an influx of clients starting to come back to the market after the lockdown?
To buy?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of pent up energy there, because it's not just about investment. You know, I deal with a lot of investors, but it's about getting a home. And right now, money has never been cheaper. And our last interest rate cut was in response to COVID. So it was an emergency cut. And we haven't really had, you know, a marketplace that's been stable and bountiful since then. We've had limited stock, we've had stop start with what we're allowed to do. So when the floodgates open and buyers are allowed to get out there, I think our biggest issue will be enticing vendors to come on, because the buyers know how tight stock is and how much prices aren't tumbling down, but the vendors don't necessarily, because they're not out in it, mixing with it and feeling it, they're reading the headlines. So I think limitations to stock supply are probably the biggest threat for buyers, but I do believe that we'll see some spring campaigns with vendors, and it will feel bountiful for a bit there, because they're all on hold with their campaigns ready to go, and agents are indicating that they've got pipelines and they've got vendors.
Oh, that's good. That's really optimistic. Our as soon as we had the announcement, because Kate and I work in the Kate and I are both licensed. Kate's an advocate, and I'm a licensed agent, and I work in the first-time home buyer space and the investment space. What happened to us is that the inquiry level just stopped. Dan made the announcement, and everything stopped. What we've been doing, though, and I think you've been doing the same thing, Kate. We have been readying ourselves to getting out of this. And the opportunities that exist at the other side of this are phenomenal. There's gossip around Daniel Andrews maybe offering additional funds other than the home builders bonus. Do you think that's a possibility to kick back up the market?
I think anything is. I think what's a possibility is extending it, massaging the offering. If you look at all of the offerings and the incentives that have, and crisis payments initiatives that have come out of this, I do take my hat off to those that have been involved in putting them together, because they've done it at lightning speed. And while we've seen some flaws in some of the offerings and entitlements, it's very hard to launch something that big time. Sorry, I just can't help but laugh. Yeah, well, to get it all right, and to road test every loophole, and to think forward. It's like being told that you're launching a massive software system across a global organisation, but you've got 10 minutes to bug test it. I mean, that's what it was like for these guys and girls, whoever was involved in pulling them together. But I think that with the limitation to being actually able to spend it, I mean, they've allocated the funds, they've worked off an estimated number of recipients. If we haven't got that, and we know we haven't because we've been reading that, they'll need to widen it or push the timeline out.
They did that in WA. In WA, the state government offered funds towards the home builders bonus, which is, I've got a lender in WA, and they are just going bonkers, which is extraordinary. Hayley, your rental market is firm. Any changes to legislation that any of our listeners need to know? Anything that you want to finish on?
Yeah, so we were meant to have our 130 changes come through on the 1st of July 2020. But
130.
130, yeah. They've postponed that to a date no later than the 1st of January 2021. The REIV are pushing pretty firmly back at government now, asking them to put it off for another 6 months. So they're proposing to have it put off till the 1st of July 2021. So we're just waiting to see if it's going to roll out on the 1st of Jan or the 1st of July next year. So that's probably the biggest thing hanging over us at the moment. And obviously the COVID legislation, which was put in place, was meant to end at the end of September. They've extended that to the 31st of December. So we're working within kind of 3 different types of legislation at the moment. So it's been fun.
Does that make it really difficult for you, Hayley? I can imagine that would be a nightmare.
Oh, see, I really enjoy legislation, so I find it a challenge.
There's got to be someone.
There's got to be a tattoo or a bumper sticker in there somewhere.
But it's quite funny because I manage a big Facebook group for property managers, and I get about 20 messages a day from people going, what about this? What about this? Can you tell me this? And, what's the number of this part of the legislation? So property managers are really confused. And that's what it comes down to, because it's really confusing times and there's no one really out there leading it all either. So I find it fun, but I don't think everyone else does.
No. Funny that. Kate, what about you? What do you want to finish on today?
Wow, I think, mirroring Hayley's comments around legislation, and also navigating something that there's no rule book for this. I've never seen what to do in real estate when a pandemic hits. And I think it was very difficult for everyone. I mean, when we had stage 4 introduced, we were all screaming at the REIV, who were screaming at the Minister's office, and everyone was wanting to know, well, what's the rule for this? And we have to step back and think, again, like I was saying with the initiatives, this is like launching something huge and global without getting to bug test it. And we're dealing with bureaucrats that don't understand, you know, all of the steps that we experience in real estate. And even just me talking to you, Elizabeth, you're in the new property space, and to Hayley in the leasing space, we all do something different within a dynamic industry. And so I don't think anyone outside of the industry would be able to document all of the things that we needed to get our head around for this, which is why we've all been flying blind a little bit and working out what the rules actually are. But it was difficult for that first week of lockdown. We genuinely didn't know what we were and weren't allowed to do. Even as far as watering the plants at the office, we're not allowed to go into the office. It's been very restrictive, and we've all had to get our heads around it. And I think, you know, it's been an incredible journey. We've learnt so much about very fast adaptation, but, you know, I give credit to our industry leaders, because they've kept us all prepped as they've been hearing from the Minister's office, and that's the best that they could do.
Yeah, I'm a bit like you. I am finding the whole experience quite remarkable. I think the way everybody has pulled together to address this, to get on with it. And, you know, I have all these incredible conversations weekly, as you know, and everyone is on the same page when it comes to life. Life first. Let's do the lockdown. Let's just protect life. And the way everybody's created solutions inside of this just to protect life has been extraordinary. And I'm like you, Kate and Hayley, I commend all of our leaders for the way they've reacted and for the way they've done everything, even though we've been flying a little blind there for a wee bit. Ladies, thank you for joining us. Kate, how do our listeners find you?
katebakos.com.au.
So simple, just so simple. What about you, Hayley Mitchell?
So Geelong Property Managers is probably the best way to find me. So hayley@geelongpm.com.au.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners. If you want to get hold of any of the ladies, or you have any questions for any of our other guests, please get hold of us here at Got Money. We hope you're safe. If you have any questions, please come through to us. I want to thank the Joy team for the way they take care of us while we work remotely. They're extraordinary. And take care, everyone.